Hello, I'm Eric Matisek, co-chair of Denver Startup Week. Last year, we were able to bring the global audience together for Denver Startup Week, and this year, we're excited to welcome that global audience back as we celebrate and showcase the best of entrepreneurship that the Denver ecosystem in Colorado has to offer, in Denver and beyond. There are lots to explore this week, but most importantly, we're excited that you're joining us. We have nearly 50 sponsor companies who contribute to make Denver Startup Week possible. Let's show our love for these companies today and all week long. Thanks to our headquarters and title sponsor, Amazon, and our title sponsors whose leadership makes this week come to life, Capital One Cafe, the Downtown Denver Partnership, Fluid Truck, Hotel Engine, and WeWork, and our track sponsors who've made all the great content you're hearing today possible, which includes our founder track sponsor, Kickstart, our growth track sponsor, Friday Health Plans, developer track sponsor, Quizlet, product track sponsor, Palantir, design track sponsor, Battery 621 and the Public Works, people track sponsor Exactly, and the spotlight event sponsor, Strat Labs. Our headline event sponsors are bringing this excitement to the entire week. Thank you to B-Side Fund, Colorado Public Radio, Comcast, Coors Brewing Company, Denver Pavilions, Entrepreneurship at the University of Denver, Gusto, JP Morgan Chase, Method, Moss Adams, Pi Insurance, Promontory Mortgage Path, Red Bull Basement, Southwest, Tattered Cover, and the VF Venture Foundry. Finally, thank you to our sponsors and member sponsors who are listed on the screen, and thank you for your support of Denver Startup Week. Now, let's get to it.
Well,
Yeah.
Hey boss, Mountain West Q2 forecast, 2.3 million.
Nice. Are you kidding me? Come on.
ugh, another one.
Welcome to Denver Startup Week. I'm Ashley.
And I'm Emma. We are the People Track co-chairs and members of the Denver Startup Week Organizing Committee.
Thank you for joining us for the 10th anniversary of Denver Startup Week. At Denver Startup Week, we strive to make all of our sessions a space where attendees can connect, learn, and grow, regardless of age, gender identity, gender expression, race, ability, or sexual orientation.
A special thank you to our sponsors for their support in helping us to keep Denver Startup Week free and accessible for all, especially our People Track sponsor, Exactly.
On that note, please enjoy the session and the entire Denver Startup Week.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. We're so glad that you're here. We're glad to be here at Denver Startup Week. I'm Nancy Kepner, and I'm here with Juliana Christie. We're the co-founders of Crafted Leadership, a leadership development and training consultancy. Here's what we're planning to do today. We're going to cover some logistics and the agenda, tell you a little bit about us. We'll hear from you, and then we'll dive into our content. So first, some logistics. We intend for this to be an interactive training. We'd love for you to use the chat box. And you can also you can raise your hand using the digital hand raising function. There will be times when we'll pause and ask for input. And we also request that you would mute yourselves when you're not speaking. So that's the logistics. A little bit about Juliana and I. We have been practicing and studying and evolving our conscious leadership curriculum for about 15 years. The work that we do, and some of which we'll present today, has a lineage and it has a research-backed foundation, and it's been tested on thousands of participants. The work that we do, our teachers are 3 psychologists. They are in the field of leaders in the field of human behavior and human potential, and their names are Drs. Gay and Katie Hendricks and Dr. Julie Caldwell. Their work is the basis of our work, and we ask you to just experiment and try this on today. See if the skill we'll be teaching around receiving feedback works for you. We'd love to hear from you. So that's a little bit about us, and now we would love to know something from you. Since we're in the month of Halloween, we would love to know, what's your favorite Halloween candy? You can let us know in the chat box. And Jules, I'm not seeing the chat box, but I'm imagining there's some things going on with it.
Yeah, it looks delicious. I'm not gonna lie.
Just wait for someone to say Boston baked beans and then you can give a thumbs up.
Yes.
So I want us just to mention a little bit about our mission at Crafted Leadership. So our mission is to spread conscious leadership into the global workplace. So what do we mean by conscious leadership? Well, for us, it's one main operating context. Our main leadership context comes down to this. It's a line where above the line, as leaders, as individuals, you're either operating above the line, you're open, or below the line and you're closed. Above the line, you're open, you're undefended, you're curious, you're taking responsibility. And below the line, you're closed, you're defended, you're committed to being right, you're laying blame. So that's the choice we have as leaders and individuals, above the line or below the line. The skill we're going to teach today, receiving feedback, we will be teaching how to receive feedback above the line and offering ways of reflecting how you might be receiving it below the line. Now I'm going to pass it over to my co-host, Juliana.
Thanks, Nancy. Very excited that you're all here. Thank you so much for showing up and being willing to dive into the topic, which is how to receive feedback. This is a skill that really relates to that concept that Nancy just talked about being above the line or above the line or below the line. This is one of those kind of game-changing skills where if we are able to fully embrace feedback, be open and curious, regardless of how the feedback is delivered, we can really set ourselves apart as leaders. So we think this is a really, really important skill. But before we dive into the tool we're going to share with you, I'd love to get a little read on the room. And this is the point in time, Samantha, if you're still on the call, I'd love to launch that poll because I want to take a little survey of sorts and have you all rate yourselves on a scale from 1 to 6 in terms of your ability to receive feedback. So a 1 would mean I'm pretty bad at receiving feedback. I tend to get pretty defensive. A 6 would mean I'm reliably open. People know they can give me feedback and I'll receive it really openly. So I'd love to see your answers. So please respond and then we'll take a look at the results here in a minute. Thanks, everybody. I see your answers coming in. You probably can't see those yet. Almost there. Okay, I think we could end the poll now. And let's share the results. So you can see, it looks like the bulk of you rated yourselves in that kind of 4 range, with some in the 5 range. And then we have folks across the whole scale. But that's some good news. Other than the person that rated yourself a 6, looks like there's room for improvement across the board. And that's really good news. You're in the right place, I'd say. For those of you who rated yourself a 5 or under, I'd love to hear from you. And you can either speak up or you can type in the chat box. I'd love to hear you share what is tough about receiving feedback. And you can just speak up, you can raise your hand, or you can type your answers in the chat box. Yes. I see under I love watermelon Sour Patch Kids. We have not taken it personally. Yes, Katie, would you care to speak up and share more about that?
Just like not thinking that the feedback that they have for you is anything against yourself.
Yes, that's the challenge for me as well. Yeah, in other words, sort of taking it personally and hearing what they say, maybe perhaps as criticism or something critical, rather than this person giving me feedback being for my learning and for my growth. Would that be fair to say? Or am I just projecting that? That's what it's like for me.
No, that definitely sounds right. That's how I feel too. Sorry, my cat is yelling in the background. So
no problem. My dog is trying to enter the scene here. We'll see if she does. Yes, Lawrence, I see your response, fighting the urge to start explaining the why. Yes, I understand that. Yeah. Getting past the feeling of failure. Yeah, just feeling the sense of kind of being critiqued and judged. I thought maybe I heard somebody speaking up. Did somebody want to speak up about that?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, please do.
Okay.
Lawrence, I have a feeling you might be speaking, but the sound isn't coming through. I see you're on mute now. Do you want to try again? I understand. We have a lot of pets on the scene today. I'll look for your answer in the chat box. Thanks. Yeah, so I'm also seeing, Katie, you talk about this idea of the ability to be consistently open versus defensive. Katie, will you say a little bit more about that?
Just that I've noticed, like, if I'm not ready for it, like if I, I do a lot of design work. So if I know going into a critique, then I can be more open. But if I'm kind of caught on the fly, I feel like I'm more consistently defensive. So I have to be more like aware. And so how can I be more consistent to those experiences, regardless of on the fly or not on the fly?
Yeah, I can relate to that as well. And I love the idea of all leaders kind of being so skilled that not only can we be prepared to receive feedback regardless of how it's delivered, but even when it comes as a surprise and we haven't been given the forewarning, to be open even in those kinds of situations can be, again, really useful as a leader. I'm just going to take a look over at the chat box. Lawrence, thanks for piping your answer in. Yes. Yeah, I'm agreeing with everything that's here. I find those things challenging as well. And in a minute, we're going to talk about kind of the mindsets that we tend to go into when we receive feedback so that we can kind of identify more quickly when we might go into that kind of tendency to want to explain, or in my case, maybe defend, or just resist the feedback in some way. In fact, we'd say when it comes to feedback, one of the goals to maybe keep in mind is this idea that the feedback is really critical to our growth. In fact, that's how we define what feedback actually is. We say it's the ongoing stream of information that's not just useful, but we would say necessary for our growth and development. This is maybe a different way to think about it, and to be able to kind of adopt this mindset that the feedback itself is neutral, or the feedback itself is really our ally in our growth. That can also be really helpful, a helpful way to think about it. And the central skill around receiving feedback from that open, above the line state has to do with our mindset. That's the really critical part of this. It's the state that determines everything else. So we're going to talk about kind of the steps to take, but really the mindset is the first order of business. So that's what we're going to talk about next. And we would say there are 4 mindsets that tend to show up when we're receiving feedback. And 3 of these are below the line, and 1 is above the line. This is a good time for me to check in to find out if all of you received a hyperlink to a handout that looks like this. Did anybody not receive this? Looks like some of you didn't. Kat, will you put the link to the handout in the chat box? So if you haven't received that, you'll see it's listed here right in the chat box. So you'll want to download that if you want this information. So again, there are 3 mindsets below the line, and those are the ones we're going to talk about first. In other words, this is not what to do when you receive feedback. So we're going to talk about the first one. I'll bet that you've all seen this before. This is the highly offended mindset. And this is when we receive feedback, and the gut response in that moment is to tend to want to challenge the feedback, argue with the feedback, defend the feedback in some way. That might kind of relate to, Lawrence, the thing you mentioned around kind of preparing my explanation for why I did the thing that I did. Another way that the highly offended mindset shows up is that if we were to receive feedback and be highly offended, we'd probably be tempted to want to blame the feedback giver, or maybe someone else, or maybe something else, maybe the institution, the organization. A highly offended mindset might look like attacking or threatening the feedback giver. And oftentimes the person who goes into that highly offended mindset at some point gets activated or reactive enough that they leave. Now, this can either be physically leave the scene, or just kind of mentally kind of withdraw and shut down. So I'd love to see if you could give me examples of what this highly offended mindset might look or sound like. And let's say I'm going to create a scenario where, let's say I'm delivering feedback, and my feedback is that I noticed you, meaning anyone on the call, let's say interrupted Phyllis in this morning's team meeting on 2 occasions. If I gave that feedback to you and you were going to respond from a highly offended mindset and maybe exaggerate that a little bit, what might that look or sound like? And you can either say it aloud or you can type it in the chat box. I'd love to hear some improv examples if you're willing to. Sandy, thank you for the emoji. Yes. Sandy, what would be the verbal equivalent of that emoji? I like where you're going.
No, I didn't.
Yes, thank you. I'd say that was like a perfect translation of that emoji. Yes, yes, beautiful. So Jennifer, you're saying maybe justifying the interruption. Jeff, I love what you're saying here. So justifying it by saying, I had to interrupt because she wouldn't stop talking. It's a beautiful, highly offended response. Any other examples? I know you've encountered this. Nancy, any that you would add?
Something like, you think I interrupt? Listen, I've seen you interrupt, and you are a big time interrupter, and I can cite the time. And I mean, there's so many I can't even imagine that you're even talking about me interrupting, because let's talk about you interrupting. In fact, I think you interrupted me just now in order to give me that feedback.
Yes. Nancy, really impressed with your example there. And I'm reading some of the other examples in the chat box. These are so great. Beautiful examples. Okay, so I think we're pretty clear on what that highly offended mindset looks like. I want to now kind of swing to the other end of the continuum, because this can tend to be a little sneakier. And this is what we would call the collapsed mindset. It's almost on the other end of the continuum. This is when the person receives the feedback and they respond by appearing or sounding what we would call dejected. Another way that this would look would be the person is going to offer explanations and excuses. You might hear them focus a bit on some form of self-shaming. Oh, I dropped the ball. I didn't do the thing. You're right. I'm terrible. What you might notice, though, is that the person might express a lot of apology, but what's missing from the conversation is any real consideration of what the person might learn or change about themselves. So that will be the part that's missing. What also might happen is that, and this is really sneaky, this may be happening totally unconsciously, where the feedback receiver might have a subconscious intention or unconscious intention to make the feedback giver feel so badly that they're not going to want to deliver the feedback again. In a way, it's sort of a training move. In other words, if I'm the collapsed feedback receiver, I'm going to make the feedback giver so uncomfortable. So I'd love some examples of what you think this might look and sound like. Crying, yes, exactly. What else might the collapsed feedback receiver do in response to the feedback to kind of really exaggerate that collapsed kind of way of responding?
Hey, Juliana, I can't believe I messed up this bad. Like, are we going to lose the account? What's going on right now? Like, do I have to send an email? I mean, do I have to give my resignation? Like, what do I have to do here? This is awful.
Matthew, really well done. Thank you. Yes, Brett, but I'm seeing your example as well. So some form of disengagement, an unwillingness to discuss further. Jolene, 3 apologies in a row with the word so. Yes, sounds like you're all familiar with this. She said this because she hates me. Yes, we've heard some clients say that before, huh, Nancy? All right, Nancy, any other examples you'd care to add to the collapsed mindset?
My favorite is the excuses that go on and drag you down with them.
Yes.
I know that you know I've been really, really busy, and I've had 15 things to do, and my kids have to go to school, and I don't want to bother you, but I'm really sorry, and yeah, so forth.
And you can feel in that example, I don't know if anybody else feels like this, but it sort of pulls on your heartstrings. For me, and I know I've done this in the past where I've abandoned the feedback because the story that the person is telling me is really succeeding in distracting me. And so I might say in my mind, I'm just going to let go of that thing and just say maybe, well, Nancy, is everything okay? Is there anything you need? And meanwhile, I've dropped the ball on delivering the feedback that I had intended to give. So I've seen this many times with teams, and it can relieve some of the fear and tension for the feedback giver, but it doesn't let the feedback giver proceed in the conversation in a way that moves them toward the thing that they want, which is probably some behavior change or some change in agreement. So Nancy, thanks for the spectacular example. And I'm reading other examples in the chat box, and these make a lot of sense. So Yeah, thank you. All right, so we've talked about the highly offended mindset. We've talked about the other end of the continuum, which is the collapsed mindset. I want to now talk about the one that sort of falls in the middle. And I'm not going to lie, this is the one that's tougher to detect. We call it the coolly defended mindset. And this is one where the person may be agreeing outwardly, but inwardly they're dismissing the feedback. They're clinging to their position and they're just rejecting the feedback outright. They're just not letting the feedback giver know that. Sometimes it can look like really intellectualizing without taking in the information of the actual feedback. Another way that this can look is that the feedback receiver tends to want to focus on collecting information, collecting data to prove their position that might go against what the feedback was. And the last thing is that the coolly defended feedback receiver can tend to go silent and withdraw. That's that disengagement that one of you typed in the chat box. So Nancy, I'm going to turn to you for this one and see if you would exaggerate a coolly defended mindset. Let's say the same scenario. So I've just given you feedback about interrupting Phyllis in the meeting.
You know, Juliana, actually, I read some research recently. I think it was the Harvard Business Review, and about 40% of the time, interrupting actually moves the conversation along. So you might want to consider before you criticize me for interrupting. I believe I might actually be doing a favor.
Yeah. Thanks, Nancy. So everyone on the call, how many of you, if any of you, have encountered a feedback receiver like that kind of counters what you're saying with some information, some data that contradicts what you've just said? Yeah, me too. Me too. And it can be sort of like the collapsed mindset. It can feel a little seductive, because if I'm feeling a little shaky about my feedback and I'm summoning courage to deliver the thing, that can be the response that can kind of prompt me to collapse as the feedback giver. Yes, yes. And Matthew, I can think back to times that I've done that as well. And actually, I love what you're saying, what you just said, Matthew, because that's the invitation here really, is to get so familiar with these mindsets below the line that without any kind of self-criticism, I'm not self-flagellating, I'm really just curious. I'm really opening up my mind to gather some learning about what my feedback resistance looks and sounds like in the moment. And so hopefully these mindsets will help us do that. I want to definitely spend time on the above the line mindset as well. So I'm going to talk about that now. This is the one mindset that we recommend. It's the one, as I said, that's above the line, and it's what we call the open and curious mindset. This is where the feedback receiver is more interested in the learning than in being right. So they can sort of leave their ego at the door. They're letting the feedback giver know that they're interested in the learning here. Posture and body language is a really big part about being open and curious. So we would say the open and curious feedback receiver is demonstrating relaxed and open posture. So they're facing the feedback giver. They are making eye contact. They're not crossing their arms or legs. They're demonstrating openness with their body. Importantly, the open and curious feedback receiver is also going to be voicing appreciation and curiosity. In other words, saying thank you. Again, regardless of how the feedback's being delivered, whether it's a surprise, they can actually let the feedback giver know that they are, in fact, interested. So, Nancy, would you be willing to demonstrate what an open and curious mindset would sound like in the same scenario where I'm giving you feedback that you interrupted Phyllis in the meeting this morning? What would that sound like?
You're right. I did do that. Thanks for pointing that out. I want to hear from everyone. I commit to letting people finish before I say something.
Thanks for being open to the feedback. And I imagine for those of you listening to this, that would sound really good. That kind of a response would sound really inviting as the feedback giver, particularly if it's tough feedback that's requiring some courage on my part to deliver it. That's a real clear example of openness and curiosity. So we have some more content to cover, but before we do, I just want to check to see if there are any questions about these 4 mindsets, if there is any wisdom of your own that you'd like to contribute to the discussion. I'm imagining we have some very good feedback receivers in the group, so feel free to pipe in if you have questions or anything you want to share. Okay, then we have a request for all of you. So we want to take this learning that we've just explored and see if we can apply it so that we're not just exploring concepts here, you're applying the information as we meet together and explore. So what I'd like to ask all of you to do, if you're willing, is to think back to a time when you received some feedback that was probably some tough feedback to hear, and some feedback where you're guessing, or you're pretty sure, or you're sure that you went below the line when you got the feedback. And I want to start by asking you to think about what that feedback was, and somewhere, either on your computers or on some paper, write down a little summary of what that feedback was, just a short little 7 words or less summary of what that was. And after we do this, Matthew, I'll come back to your question. It's a good one. And thanks, Elizabeth, for the suggestion. I agree. So in a sense, I'm asking you to pull up a memory that was probably a little tough, where you got some tough feedback. And what I want you to do is think back to that occasion and get curious about whether you went into any of these mindsets. So I'm going to share this screen again. So the below the line mindsets are collapsed, coolly defended, highly offended. I think of those on a spectrum. And I'd love to know if you're willing to kind of reflect back on those moments when maybe you went below the line, and which did your below the line reaction look like? Was it more collapsed, apologetic? Was it more highly offended, a little pushback, kind of openly obvious pushback, or was it more in the coolly defended territory where you were defending but not necessarily revealing that you were defending the feedback? And I'd love to see your thoughts in the chat box. And if I'm not being clear about this already, I want to state again, I'm inviting you to take a look at this with a really friendly gaze. This isn't about blaming yourself or judging yourself. It's more like very friendly curiosity to just learn about ourselves, again, in the interest of being able to spot that below the line behavior as quickly as we can. Beautiful. So I see we have some collapsed, we have some coolly defended. Where do you fit if you put the feedback into a BS category? Well, Lydia, I'd love to hear more about that. Do you care to share? Lydia, would you care to say anything more about the filing the feedback in the BS category? I think you're on mute, Lydia. I can see you speaking, but can't hear you. Oh, that's strange. Will you speak again?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
I know I have received feedback before and just thought that's not true, and not really been open to even considering someone else's perspective or like where they got that perspective. I have a specific example with one of the ladies I work with. We get along really well, and I get along with everybody I work with. And one day she told me, "You really don't get along well with, or people don't get along well with you." And I was like, "Well, that's not true." So I just kind of was like, I'm going to ignore that thought.
Yeah. And what you're describing has my interest because, yes, it's going to happen at times that we receive feedback that we disagree with. What's interesting to me is the part that you said, I didn't take the time to consider what was prompting them to say this. And that makes me think, yeah, that might have been below the line, even if ultimately you feel like, yeah, this actually doesn't apply to me. But I would say, I'm going to check in with Nancy on this, by the way, who is the single best feedback receiver that I've ever encountered in my whole life. Nancy, will you say something about how you navigate those moments when maybe feedback comes that you disagree with, but you want to, at the same time, practice some openness and curiosity? How do you do that?
Yeah, I would say look for the grain of truth. And grain can be minuscule, but there's a reason we attract the feedback. That's my view, and I think Juliana's view. Even if it's feedback we say really doesn't serve us, there's some reason why we're attracting it. So we could either defend or get curious. Is there a grain of truth? Why am I receiving this feedback? What have I done to set myself up for that? I think that's the most empowering move we can do. And that's what we tend to go for.
Yeah. And Nancy, I want to confirm that I've seen you do that like dozens and dozens, if not hundreds and hundreds of times. Really appreciate you as an ongoing teacher for how to receive feedback really openly. Yeah. Yeah. So what I'm seeing in the chat box is a lot of coolly defended and a lot of collapsed. And I would say maybe the invitation here is to just continue to get curious about this event that happened in the past, but also in moments when moving forward, you receive some feedback, and being on a really rigorous lookout for the ways in which you go collapsed, the ways in which you go coolly defended. For me, I'm just trying to think about one of my examples. I think one of the ways that I go coolly defended is to go really silent and withdraw. And so that now is one of my cues, both for me and also actually for my business partner, Nancy. When she notices that, she might say, "Hey, Jules, how did that feedback land for you? Are you below the line right now?" Or better yet, I can spot and notice myself contracting. Oftentimes I'll pull back, I'll get quiet, I'll withhold my thoughts, and that can then be a signal to me, oh, I've gone below the line. That's really the goal here. So having done this exploration, I want to share with you one set of tools that you could apply in these moments to really turn that around. This may relate to what you were asking about in the chat box, Matthew. We'll see. I'll come back and ask you. But we would say in those moments when you find yourself going below the line into kind of a reactive state, even if it's happened in the distant past, there is a key question that can really turn this around. And I'll show you what that question is. It looks like this. It's a very empowering question, difficult sometimes to face in the moment. but can be really useful. And the question is, am I willing to shift? Meaning, am I willing to shift my state around this feedback that I've received? And the important thing to remember is it's a yes or no question. And a no is okay, actually. It's okay to say no. You may come back later and ask again, and your answer may be different. But this is one we'd say doesn't really work too well to fake. It works better when you have like what we would call a full body yes to shifting your state. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask all of you this very question. So around the feedback that you received in the past that to which you went below the line into one of those below the line mindsets, are you willing to shift your state right now about this feedback from the past? And you can give me your answer by typing in the chat box or giving me a thumbs up on your screen. Either one would be okay. And again, a no is all right. I kind of want to see where the group is. Yes or no, willing to shift. Matthew, I see your thumbs up. I see some other thumbs up. Great. Thanks, Casey. I like your shirt. All right. The rest of you can kind of pipe in at your pace. If you have a yes to this question, am I willing to shift? This would be the set of the tool that I would invite you to try on. And it's a set of questions, and it's what we would call wonder questions. And there are 3 that will likely work in any of these situations. The first one is, I wonder what I'm meant to be learning here. So even if I disagree with the feedback that they've given me, I wonder what learning this is presenting to me. This is such a powerful question. So that may be one to consider. The second one is, I wonder how I helped to create this situation. So even if they're telling me, hey, looks like you don't get along with anyone on the team, I wonder how I helped create this situation that this person is coming to me and delivering this feedback. It's curious. The third one is, I wonder how I might let go of any of my defensive postures that are inhibiting rapid learning for me. Another very powerful question. So I'm going to invite all of you who answered yes to that question, am I willing to shift? I'm going to invite you to pick one of these questions and then apply this question, your chosen wonder question, to the situation where you may have gone below the line when you received this feedback. Okay. And once you've done that, I want to invite you to I'm trying to decide something. I find these questions work best with a little movement. So I realize you're all at your computers, but I'm actually going to invite you to get up from your chairs, move your body a little bit, take some deep breaths, float the question that you selected in your mind in a really friendly way while you think about this feedback that you received, and see if some new insight comes to you. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to go away and do that. And Kat, if you're listening in, maybe you could set that timer screen and just set it for 2 minutes so folks will know when to come on back. So I'm going to give you a full 2 minutes to just focus on this question. And then we'll reconvene in 2 minutes. Happy wondering. While you all are reflecting on that exercise, I just want to acknowledge, I know somebody just joined us. We're just in the middle of an exercise. We just have about a minute left, so hang in there. We'll begin our conversation here again in a minute. Okay, start to come on back if you would. Thanks, Kat. So we have a couple of questions in the queue. I'm going to hold off on answering those for a minute to hear if anyone would be willing to share, maybe starting in the chat box, which question was it that you focused on in that exercise just now? Will you type that in? And I'll pull that list of questions back up so that you can see them. I'd be curious which one you picked. Thanks, Matthew. So is it the wonder what I'm meant to be learning? I wonder how I help create this. I wonder how I might let go of my defensive postures. Those are the questions. Thanks to those of you who are typing in the chat box. I really appreciate it. Beautiful. Katie, you took on 2 questions, very advanced. So for those of you who may have shared your question, which one you're focusing on, would you be willing to also maybe turn yourself off mute and speak about what insight came to you as a result of reflecting on that question? I'd be really interested. Anybody willing? It's very brave sharing if you do share, and I'll be very appreciative. You don't have to, but I'm offering it up.
I'll speak.
Thanks, Jolene.
In the situation that I had, it was my boss giving me some feedback from someone else, but it was delayed. It wasn't in the moment. And I think the question I focused on is I wonder how I helped create this situation. And I think that I could have sought out feedback a little more frequently from her instead of just waiting. And that would have helped.
Yeah. It's such a gutsy thing to do. We recommend that often. In other words, especially around areas where we know we have some learning to mine, putting people on notice and saying, hey, for example, I might say to you all, I'm working on trying to avoid the word when I'm presenting. Would you actually give me feedback when you notice that? This could actually be a real-time request to all of you. I might get a flood of feedback. But taking the initiative can be a really powerful thing to do. I love what you're describing, Jolene. Thanks so much for speaking up. Beautiful.
Thanks.
Yeah. Anybody else want to share which question you focused on and what insight you may have gotten from that internal reflection? It sometimes has nothing to do with the actual feedback, but could be some learning about feedback in general. It can be really useful.
I'm happy to pitch in, Juliana.
Thanks, Michael.
I have a leadership opportunity within the company, and this is a reminder of me modeling receiving feedback to others. And I generally am perceived as being open to it, but it's kind of that deepening, like how can I go deeper? How can I model it more so that way other people want to lean into it as well?
Yeah, beautiful. Matthew, everyone, Matthew is somebody I happen to know. And Matthew, I would put you in the same category as Nancy as being a reliably, extraordinarily open feedback receiver. You have modeled that for me. In fact, Nancy's agreeing, I can see. So to think about you opening, deepening even more, I imagine has a really big impact on the people around you. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for sharing. Anybody else want to share about maybe what came to you in that exercise?
I will. I think, in my example, I was kind of between coolly defended and highly offended.
Yes.
In that, I didn't feel prepared for the feedback, and I wasn't looking at it from the other person's perspective. So the question I asked myself was, I wonder how I can let go of my defensive postures. And I think the first thing I can think of is kind of taking a minute to take a breath and try to see things from the other person's perspective, even though it may not be correct, or it might not be mine, or, whatever. So that was what I thought about.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm going to say that my attention really went to the first thing you said about taking a breath, and would love to ask you to share a little bit more about why taking a breath feels like a useful thing to do in that moment.
Because then you're kind of lowering your fight or flight response. I feel like, you're being able to better think things through rather than just quickly react.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. We talk a lot about using the body in multiple ways, but the breath is one of the most powerful tools, especially because when we get activated, when I get activated, I'm probably going into what we call a drama triangle situation where I'm playing some role, either a victim, villain, or hero. I'm collapsing, going victim. I'm going villain, wanting to attack the person. That means a lot of adrenaline is surging, and breath, slow, like even 3 long, slow breaths can flush that adrenaline out of my system and assist me in staying present. So I'm so thrilled that you said that. We talk a lot about the power of something as simple as a breath, powerful thing to do, easy thing to do, tough to remember to do in the moment, but I really love that. Katie, I see your comment. I feel like I think about the shift questions after the fact. How can I get better about being in the moment? That's a good one. Nancy, how would you feel about feeling that question? It's a really good one.
I think if you can memorize one of those questions, and I'll just speak for myself. If you memorize, what am I meant to learn from this? Then the minute you sense, which would probably be about 2 seconds after they open their mouth, especially if it's coming at you and it's not delivered in the nicest way, if you can give your brain something to do, anchor on the question versus everything else that's going on. So I would say memorize one of the questions. All 3 really are useful. It gives you something to do. You can try it out.
Thanks, Nancy.
Yeah.
And in fact, these questions don't appear on your handout, but I want to address something with all of you. And Mark, this is going to address your question about kind of keeping these techniques sort of prominent and visible. If any of you are interested in receiving this PowerPoint, this slide deck after we're done today, we can send that to you. You'll see at the end of the session today, we're going to share a way to contact us. Maybe I'll have Kat, you put that in the chat box just right now. So you could just drop us your email and we can send actually a few things to you. We could send this slide deck, and we can also send a worksheet that's like the accompanying worksheet to the handout that we're exploring today, which is all about giving feedback. We're not going to talk about giving feedback, but we have some useful, we have a useful framework, I think, that applies well when giving feedback. So you could receive all this from us. We're a big fan of keeping this information visible, memorizing certain things so that it's easily accessible, because it's so easy to get reactive in the moment and lose a memory of these tools that we actually have in our tool belt. Yeah, so just send us a message using the link that's been posted, craftedleadership.com, contact us. So coming back to the content that we're covering, I want to come back to the question, Matthew, you asked earlier about whether it's, I think you asked whether it's possible to turn it around. I'm going to pause for a second. I think your name is Layla. Layla, did you want to speak up? Looks like you put yourself on mute. Okay. So Matthew, will you repeat the question that you typed in the chat box?
Yes, it's timely, as I had a feedback conversation yesterday and was thinking back to starting out, going below the line, realizing that's not where I wanted to be, and then figuring out how to pop back above the line in the conversation. So like that self-awareness piece of really trying to sit there and say, oh, okay, like, yes, I started going collapsed and defensive, but then I was curious about, like, this is definitely advanced, but like shift moves in the moment to sit there and say, oh, okay, I'm noticing I'm doing this. Like, any recommendations there?
Well, what do you use? It sounds like you have a whole toolkit of shift moves in the moment. So what do you focus on?
I got to the point in the call where it's like, oh, well, you know, if you notice me doing this behavior in the future, will you let me know? So it was very much a sense of like, I realize this isn't how I want to show up, and I'm realizing I'm blind to it. So is it, and that may be more victim, so I want to be careful of going on the triangle, but I'm more aware of it now, and could you help me with my awareness in the future?
Beautiful. I think that's exquisite openness to feedback right there. So real course correction, a demonstration of openness, in the future. I imagine the person or the people who gave you the feedback really melted in that moment when they got to witness that kind of a response. Yeah, really, really well done. All right. There's something else I want to explore with you all. And I see, Lawrence, your question there. I don't see the email address in the chat. Kat, would you post that again? It's really going to be a hyperlink to one of our site where you could just kind of send us an email. But another way, a shorter hand way to share it with you would be to say you could email us at hello@craftedleadership.com. Kat, maybe you could type that in the chat box as well for me, if you would. Yeah, thanks. So we've talked about the important information about our mindset when receiving feedback and putting some practices and mantras and reminders in place to better our chances that we can stay open in the moment when receiving feedback, even if it's a surprise. Now I want to talk about the actual steps that you might keep in mind in those moments. And I want to break them down into 3 chunks. So I'm going to screen share here again. And you can follow along on your handout on the second page. And it looks like this. And maybe, Kat, you could post this just one more time since we've had some newcomers come. So in case they don't have the handout, I want to talk about some steps, some tangible steps that you can take before receiving feedback, during the feedback, and afterward. And I'm going to talk first about what you could do ahead of receiving the feedback. This is when you actually know the feedback is coming, so it doesn't really apply to the surprise moments. But we would say, if you know the feedback is coming, see if you can prepare yourself, organize yourself to be ready to receive the feedback, and cultivate some curiosity in your body and in your mind to be ready for that. The second thing would be to hold in your mind this mantra, I see you as my ally. So deciding ahead of time that this person is for you and for your growth. This can make a big impact. And then we have another mantra, and this came from one of our participants some years ago who had learned this mantra to help her in those moments when she's readying herself to receive feedback. And it's this: I'm not fragile and they're not mean. I'm not fragile, you're not mean. it really interrupts that mindset that could have snuck in there, where we might want to see the other person as the villain, see myself as the victim. Instead, try this one on. I'm not fragile. You're not me. Can be really powerful. So that's the sort of what to do ahead of time. Here's what we would recommend doing in the moment while you're receiving feedback. So the first thing is the thing we talked about earlier. Open up your body posture, make eye contact, face the person. Don't cross your arms and legs. Let your body do some of the communicating that you are, in fact, open. Do the thing that we talked about earlier. Take some slow, deep breaths. You can just focus on your breathing while you're receiving the feedback, and that will help your nervous system be organized to receive. The third thing we recommend all the time is to say thank you for the feedback. You heard Nancy use that phrase, and that can do, again, a lot of the work to communicate your openness. Also kind of gives you something else to focus on coming out of your mouth, rather than maybe some of the highly offended or collapsed statements that might be on the tip of your tongue. And then we would say, if you find yourself struggling to receive the feedback, or you notice that you're getting reactive and going a little bit below the line, you can say to the person, I'd like to pause. I want to take some time to digest what you've said. I will respond in more depth when I've had a little time to digest. But right now, I think I would benefit from a pause. That can be really useful. So those are the steps while receiving feedback. And I'm just going to keep moving on and talk about the what to do after you've received the feedback. This can be a really potent time for you as well. And we would say the first step would be to really reflect, sit with the feedback, digest it, think about it a little bit, let your body kind of take in what you've heard. Consider whether you've received this feedback before, and you might let the person know right away. You're not the first person that's told me that. At that point, you can decide whether you want to make any adjustments. You get to discern the feedback, because like we've talked about, it may or may not apply on the surface, but if you really give it some thoughtful consideration, there may be something you want to do or say in response. And we would invite you to respond to the feedback giver with one or all of these suggestions. So number one, you might ask some clarifying questions. So for example, we talked about the situation where you may have gotten some feedback in the form of an observation that it looks like you don't get along with anyone. So you might say, I'd love to hear more about what you've noticed that prompted that thought. Would you be willing to say more? We're going to invite you to take healthy responsibility in that moment. That means once you've done some reflection, go ahead and claim your part in the situation. And then consider whether there's a new agreement that you want to make, a new behavior that you want to make. What you heard Nancy respond with before was, yeah, I really commit to letting people speak and completing what they have to say. So that's a change of agreement. So I want to pause here and see if you have any questions or thoughts or wisdom of your own that you might consider adding to those tips for the before, during, and after receiving feedback. I'll keep my eye on the chat box if you have any contributions, or keep an eye out for hands up if there's anything you want to add to the discussion. Yes. Thanks for asking, Mark. Yes, I can definitely pull that slide back up. So this is the third of the 3 slides. And I'll mention that you have this information on the handout. If you've downloaded the handout, it's worded a little bit differently, but the concepts are there. Thanks, Kat. Yeah, that's really good. Elizabeth, care to say more about that? You don't have to, but if you would like to speak up.
Sure.
Yeah.
No,
thanks.
sure. So I've had people, for example, tell me that I say too much, like your example earlier, right?
Thank you.
So I fully publicly let my team know I would like feedback. So if you notice that I'm doing this when I'm presenting, just quickly raise your hand, put it back down. You don't have to say anything, but then I'll be more aware in the moment.
Yes. I imagine that was received very well when you did that. Would that be fair to guess?
Yes.
Yeah. 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 Thanks for sharing about that. And Elizabeth, I'm seeing your question about timing. How long do you recommend allowing either as the feedback giver or the feedback receiver before coming back to the conversation again? Nancy, what's your thought on that? Do you have a thought on the tip of your tongue?
You asked that again, Juliana? I was reading the comments.
Yeah. It's the question from Elizabeth. Sometimes I need that extra time, wondering about how long to wait.
Well, we use, when you and I do it, Juliana, or with other people, we'll make an agreement of how long it will be. So for instance, if Juliana and I have something where one of us becomes reactive, one of us will say, I notice I'm reactive, I'd like to take a break, but I'll come back at 5:30. Can we take a half hour? Something like that. Or can we take a day? We probably wouldn't say a day, but certainly some of our teams would.
Yeah. So as soon as possible. So otherwise, probably the other person is in a state of anxiety waiting to hear the thing. So we like to be pretty respectful about that.
I wanted to add one thing if I can. If you're the person who asks for a break, then your healthy responsibility during that break is to do something to shift your state. So those questions that we suggest, walking around with those versus going below the line and looking for evidence and data to support your position. So there's a break, and then there's your responsibility to get yourself above the line for when you return to the conversation.
Yeah. Thanks, Nancy. Yeah. So, but I love what you said. And open-ended, I might get back to you, is tricky to navigate. Yeah. If somebody said that to me, I would be so anxious. I'd be like, what are you going to do if you don't? Yeah. Whereas saying something like, I know I've said this to you before, Nancy, I'm noticing I'm really reactive. I'm below the line right now. I'm going to take some time to shift my state, but I will get back to you within 24 hours for sure. I imagine that could be, just as you say, Matthew, a trust builder and gentle on both of our nervous systems in a way. All right. I have one other exercise that I have in mind for you all, and I'll be honest and reveal that I'm wondering if you actually will want to participate in this, because I'm not seeing many of your faces. I don't know if you're fully listening and present, or if you're kind of multitasking. So I'll make this request in advance. If you don't want to participate in an activity that's going to involve some breakout groups, will you let us know by indicating that in the chat box? And Kat, who's going to do some breakout group selecting, will know to leave you out of this exercise, but I'll share a little bit more about what I have in mind. So in my view, one of the ways to really build our feedback receiving muscle is to practice, and then practice, and then practice, and practice, and practice. That's how to do it. So in other words, it's a little bit like inoculating ourselves, normalizing receiving tough feedback, and building up some tolerance in a way. So my thought is that we could do a little practice with each other right now and put these tips to use with each other. So here's my idea. And thanks, Sandy, for doing exactly what I asked. So Kat will leave you out of this exercise. No problem. Thanks, Jeff. For those of you who want to participate in this, the first step will be to think about some feedback that you could imagine receiving that would be a little tough to hear, but would have some truth to it. So I already revealed mine. Jules, you use the word a lot when you present. That would be mine. I want you to do your version. So it could be in a work context. It could be in a personal context, either one of those. And then I'd say, write it down just to get it nice and succinct. And those of you who are willing to participate in this, I really appreciate it. I'm hoping it can present some good practice for you. Thanks, everybody. For those of you who are typing in the chat box, really appreciate it. So my thought is that for those of you who are willing, I'm going to put you, Kat's going to put you into groups of 3. And what'll happen when you get in your group of 3 is you're just going to reveal to somebody in the group, hey, this is the tough feedback. I'm going to invite you to say it to me. So in fact, Nancy, I want to do this with you, and maybe you be the first feedback receiver. So you're going to tell me what would be the feedback that would be tough to hear, but would have some truth to it. So what would that be about you?
Something about, I have a lot of ideas, but I don't always consider all that's involved in implementing them.
Okay, great.
You may be familiar with being on that part of.
Yes. Yes. Thanks for being so open right here, Nancy, and choosing a real one. I really appreciate that. So if Nancy and I were partnering, if we were in a group of 3, but let's say Nancy picked me to be the feedback giver, I would say, okay, Nancy, you ready for the feedback?
Yes.
Okay. Then I'm going to do a little ad lib here to just add some uniqueness to the experience. So I might say, hey, Nancy, man, you come up with a lot of ideas, and sometimes I have the thought that you have no concept of how long they're going to take. And I notice I get really angry because it puts strain on our other work. And so I want to let you know I've noticed that. And so now Nancy's going to practice responding. She's getting a little inoculating experience. So Nancy, how would you respond?
Yeah, you're right. I do throw out a lot of ideas, and I realize I don't always consider the strain that they create. And I hear that sometimes you feel angry about that. So I commit to, when discussing new ideas, to including discussion about timeline and priority with any new idea.
Thanks so much. Thanks for being open to my feedback.
Yeah, thank you for the feedback.
I told you Nancy was really open to feedback, and she did not disappoint. So thanks, Nancy. So for those of you who are willing to participate, that's what you're going to do. And you're going to be in groups of 3, and you might get someone in your group who's not present. That's okay. Just make it work if you can. But I would say when you get in your small group, you'll have a little minute to say hello. And then what you can do is decide who's going to be the first receiver. And the first receiver would do just what Nancy did. Pick somebody in the group, share the tough feedback. That second person would deliver the feedback. You get to practice, keep your hand out handy, practice receiving, then move on to the next person. If Nancy and I were in a group, I'd be the second explorer, and I'd say, hey, Nancy, here's the tough feedback. So everybody gets a chance to practice both receiving and giving. So let me test and see, is there anybody who has any questions about what I'm going to ask you to do? Okay. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to be put into a breakout room. Kat, by the way, are you all set to do this? Oh, thanks. And I'm going to give you 6 minutes. So Kat, I'm changing the time just a little bit. So 6 minutes total. If you have any questions or you get stuck, come on back to the large room, the main room. Looks like I think I lost some people with this assignment.
Well, they might be going. They're already.
Oh, got it. Okay. Got it.
Jules, do you want me to join a room?
No, I'd say stay here, Nancy.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, bud. I didn't realize that it already happened. It's like, I think we scared him away. So
Kat,
those of you, oh, hi, Kat.
Kat's on it.
So Kat, in 5 minutes, will you give the notification, and will you put the clock, the breakdown time up so folks can see? And those of you who are still in the room, if while you're here in the space you have any questions, feel free to speak up or type in the chat box, or we can just hold off. And Kat, would you be willing to cut that short by a minute? So in other words, right now, go to 5:40 or close to it. I made this tougher, I realize. Thanks. Oh, Jeff, I love this question. Jeff's asking, what are our thoughts on the feedback sandwich? And you're saying you're not a fan. Will you just say more about why you're not a fan? I'd love to hear that. And you can speak.
Yeah, so can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so the reason I'm not a fan is I think the feedback gets lost. So those that don't know what a feedback sandwich is, you start out with a compliment, something they're doing well, then you give the feedback of the behavior you won't change, and then you end it with something they're doing well. Well, as a leader, I've given that feedback and they've walked away thinking they're great. And as someone receiving the feedback, the same thing is happening on my end. I get the actual behavior of the feedback that they're addressing gets lost. And that's why I'm not a fan.
Yeah, I'm with you. I have a personal preference that matches yours. I think for me, what I've noticed is that people who do that, it's brought up a little body memory for me, I think. And so when somebody delivers an appreciation, I notice my nervous system gets a little activated, and I can't shed the fear that I'm going to get some critical feedback here on the heels of the appreciation. So I think it can create it so that the feedback itself is lost, and down the road, it can diffuse an appreciation and make it such that the appreciation gets lost as well. So I'm a big fan of separating those out. Now, I will say that some people we've met with actually really prefer it that way. They do like that. So it may be a question to ask people around you. How do you feel about receiving feedback? Do you have any preferences? Do you like the feedback sandwich or not? And Katie, I tend to agree with you that it can feel a little insincere. So I'm not a fan. Nancy, do you have any thoughts on the feedback sandwich?
Well, I'm thinking our teacher, Katie Hendricks, would not be a fan because of exactly what Katie said. It's for her, it's all about being present and in the moment. And so if you prepare a feedback sandwich, you've sort of lost, you're into rehearsal now, and may not actually be able to stay present with the person because you've got this manufactured system.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the good question, Jeff. Any other questions or wisdom from the folks who are listening in from the main room? You get like bonus content right here. Kat, what's your feeling about the feedback sandwich?
I also don't really like it because you like the second you hear a compliment, you're like, oh, what's next?
Yeah.
Like it kind of mentally prepares you for the bad thing coming up.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree.
Instead, we're not giving feedback because the feedback sandwich, when we do our version of direct feedback, is you don't do the bread at all. The bread would be
no bread,
or the wrap or the lettuce, whatever your particular outside filler is.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'll state again for those of you who might be listening in, while Kat, you're getting ready to close the groups such that everybody gets a 1-minute warning. We have lots of skills that we teach around giving feedback as well. So if you're interested in any of that, don't forget to send a little email to hello@craftedleadership.com and we can send that feedback giving tool that we have for folks. In fact, I'll put this. Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Kat. All right, folks should be starting to come back here in a minute. Kat, thanks for handling all that. Welcome back if you're rejoining us. Kat, you can go ahead and stop sharing if you would be willing to. Oh, looks like everybody took the full time. That's a good sign. They'll all start popping back in unless they left.
Nice.
See what happens. Welcome back. Thanks to all of you who were willing to do that. How was that? Did it feel good? Was it scary? Thumbs up. Yeah, I'm impressed that you jumped into the experiment. Went too quick. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for letting us know. We did sort of rush through that a little bit. If you didn't get a chance to practice and you'd like more practice, you can do this anytime on your own. You could ask for support around receiving feedback. In fact, that's kind of one of the final points that I'd like to make would be coming out of this, I'm going to invite you to reconceive your relationship with feedback and consider taking some steps to create a new relationship with yourself and others around feedback. So if you want to try this stuff on and give yourself a chance to practice, maybe go back to your team and ask for this feedback, ask for feedback around the thing that you might be poised to receive feedback around. Consider going to your colleagues and people in your personal life and make some clear agreements about how and when you'd like to receive feedback. The agreement that Nancy and I have with each other is that we're open to feedback anytime, any place, in front of anyone about anything. That one is a live wire kind of agreement to make around feedback. We've put it to the test. It's a good way to boost my practice around it. And we recommend having a discussion where you land on what works for you. So maybe you might make an agreement that is, I'm open to feedback, but I prefer it privately. Please give me feedback one-on-one, not in front of a group. And that could be my way of kind of ramping up to receiving feedback openly, but I'm creating the conditions that allow me to practice in a friendly way. As leaders, when you model openness to feedback, that can have a really big impact on those around you. So we really encourage you to demonstrate that publicly as often as you can. It really starts to create a field where there is a healthy flow of feedback back and forth. And if you are the leader of a team, they're watching you, they will model what you are demonstrating. I'm going to stop talking and hand it over to you, Nancy. I think we have some stuff we want to share in closing. Is that right?
We do. Well, first we want to say thank you, everyone, for being here, and thanks for being an engaged audience. We love that. And thanks to Denver Startup Week for allowing us to present. We would love your questions. We'd love to stay in touch. If you have questions for us, you can email us at nancy@craftedleadership.com or juliana@craftedleadership.com. You can tweet your questions at craftedleaders. And if you'd like a copy of this slide deck, email us at hello@craftedleadership.com. We also have a worksheet that Juliana mentioned, the flip side of receiving feedback, a worksheet on giving feedback. Here's the best part. Jules, are you open to some feedback?
Yes.
I noticed that you handled this whole session by yourself, and you did it on time and so effortlessly and beautifully. And I want to appreciate you for being able to do that while being recorded, while fielding the chat box.
Thanks, Nancy.
And without saying, as Elizabeth mentioned. So big thumbs up. So you all that are still here, if you'd like to enter the drawing with a free coaching session for the best coach I know, which is Juliana Christie, just email us at hello@craftedleadership.com and we will randomly select someone. And I guarantee you it'll be a very enriching hour for you.
Thanks.
And if you'd like a copy of our, yes, we said that slide deck. So I want to also just say we don't do anything with the information you give us. That's just used for our email newsletters, and we post tips and stories and questions in there. So hopefully it'll be helpful to you. So thank you all. We really enjoyed this. Thanks, Kat, for doing a great job. It's so good to see you, Katie Messerly, again.
Beth, Matthew.
Matthew. Yeah, nice to meet all of you.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your Denver Startup Week.